Hey guys, welcome back, and today we have another week of Broadway grosses, so let's get into it. Up first, we have Juliet, which went from 93.68 to 95.19, and 1,038,278 to 949K. A very significant drop, but again, it's recouped its investment. And I saw on the message boards that this was gonna close in January, and I'm sorry, but that's just not gonna happen. Why that's not gonna happen is because it just in the last couple of months recouped its investment. But then also, when you look at the numbers for Juliet over this past year, it's done $1 million pretty consistently. Yes, it's fallen into the 9s and into the 8s, and I think maybe the 7s. I don't think the 7s. Maybe once or twice. I don't know. Point being, it's doing just well enough to not be in any danger of closing. Now, you could make an argument for it closing. You could say, well, you know, it's got the royalty rights and all of the people that need to get paid. But again, I would say that it is still making 800K plus at the very lowest. And as long as most shows are making $800,000, they're in the okay zone. Obviously, if you're something like Back to the Future or Cabaret, that's not awesome. But for something like Juliet, it's fine. Obviously, you want it to stay in the $1 million plus category. You do want to see it not go to 800,000 in an ideal situation. But again, 949K is still a solid week for Juliet. So I don't think it's in any trouble at the current moment. But A Beautiful Noise had its final week of performances, going from 84% to 86%, and 1,128,552 to 1,223,279. Back to the Future went from 94% to 89%. And 1,160,496 to 1,057,474. And again, Back to the Future, again, I don't think it's going to close at the end of this year. I think it's going to be here for years, plural. But could it close? 100%. I think if it goes and hits 7s and 6s and it takes a bad turn in the fall, which I could see happening, yes, then it would close. But the lowest it's gone is, I believe, 700,000. Actually, 802,000 in February and March. So, again, it's, like Juliet, and I think this is maybe because of how many new musicals there were this year and kind of the oversaturation of the brand musical, that Back to the Future suffered in May and June. Because if you look at before May and June, if you look at April, it made $1 million pretty much every single week. Same thing with March, except for like a week, 2 weeks, and same thing with February. So, in the first half of the year, it was doing pretty spectacular. And let's not forget, this show made $2 million plus in December. So again, I think Back to the Future has enough money in the bank to survive, and again, I think it will hit huge numbers over the summer, and then it's going to falter in the fall, but then with Thanksgiving, with Christmas, it'll be saved. But that's just my opinion. Could not happen. Cabaret went from 99.49 to 98.45, and 1,814,656 to 1,810,907. Hadestown went from 100.91 to 100.45, and 917K to 968K. So another amazing week for Hadestown. Hamilton went from 100.54 to 101.3, and 1,972,882 to 1,955,004. Hell's Kitchen went from 101.37 to 100.56, and 1,800,888 to 1,549,472. A huge 251K plus drop, but again, any show would kill for these numbers. And there was recently an article that was put out by Broadway Journal, which is, if you are interested in finances, subscribe, it's free. And they basically were saying how Hell's Kitchen is one of the few profitable big musicals that have come out in the past couple of years. And obviously, there's been a lot of notorious flops. New York is the one that kind of comes to mind. But he did give an interesting take in that's because of Hamilton, Dear Evan Hansen, all these big musicals succeeding, that investors started to invest more in larger shows. But when they started to do that, it was when COVID happened and when everything kind of went to poo-poo. Illinois had its weakest week yet. I think it's had lower. Yeah, it has. But it went from 91% to 86%, and 847K to 719K. Obviously, it is a limited engagement, and we have gone over ad nauseum why Illinois kind of hasn't worked. But to give a recap, it's more of a niche album that was probably more successful in its heyday. It's a dance musical, which I think turns off a lot of people. You saw in the YouTube comments of the Tony's performance saying, I wasn't going to see this, I wasn't interested, but when I saw the performance, I was like, I gotta see it. So I think there's a strong perception that this is like a dance musical, that it's not very interesting. And again, there's Great Gatsby, Outsiders, Daniel Radcliffe. There's so many options that I think this season was just too competitive for Illinois. I think in any season it was never going to make $1 million and be this huge hit. But I think if it had come out last season, it might have done slightly better, if not the same. And again, I think that like I say, when I went and saw it at the St. James, there was a lot of people that knew what it was, but a lot more people that said, I don't know what this is, other than that it's based on an album. And I know Middle America, the conservative market that do go and see musicals, are not going to like this because there's a gay couple in it. So that takes away some of its mainstream appeal. Again, this is the most mainstream, probably the most accessible artsy show, since Hadestown, because obviously Kimberly Kimbo and A Strange Loop were very out there and very high concept, and this is also very high concept. But again, the one thing I would say to people that say that this isn't a musical is this is exactly like Cats. Illinois and Cats are the exact same thing. I think the reason why is that the perception of the, let's say, common folk, is that Cats was a more legit musical, and that's because Andrew Lloyd Webber, it was in the time of the boom of London musicals coming over to New York City, and I think that Cats just had more of a validity to it than Illinois, because I do think that the way that Illinois has been marketed and the way it was talked about before coming to the St. James was that it was a dance piece, that it had no dialogue, that it was no intermission. Like, that was a big selling point, and that was kind of drilled into people's minds. Also, the fact that it doesn't fit into a specific box. Again, I don't think you could classify it is technically a jukebox musical on the definition that it is songs from a pre-existing album, but again, it is also a dance musical, a dance piece in a lot of ways, but it's also a musical. So again, it doesn't fit the boxes, and in order to be commercial and to succeed, you need to fit into boxes, and that this show doesn't do it. Which is why when it was at the Armory, the tagline of a new kind of musical was beautiful for Illinois. But the problem is when you go into a commercial space, that stuff gets you killed, or it gets you underwhelming box office receipts, such as Illinois has been facing, because it's only done 7s and 8s and 6s. It's done okay to, just getting by, and I wish that this show was doing better, but again, it could be doing a lot worse. But again, I think those are kind of the quick summarization and kind of reasons why Illinois kind of has not found its audience, because people like it, but there's some people that aren't into it as much. I also think that the marketing has been very low key and just kind of not very energetic in my opinion. But anyways, moving on. Merrily went from 100% to 100%, and 2,173,254 to 2,321,807. Mulan Rouge continues a very underwhelming box office of 95% to 96%, and 1,020,715 to 1,005,141. 6 went from 97% to 96%, and 989K to 915K. Subs went from 100% to 98%, and 942K to 871K. Still a solid week for subs, even though it declined this definitely I could see closing in January, but if it can maintain 8s and 9s, I think it will make it past the January mark. But again, it's hard to predict this kind of show because it surprised me at every turn, from the nominations to the wins to the box office. So I think this will maintain 9s and 8s and maybe the occasional 7 over the summer. I think the fall will be the test for stuff. So we'll see what happens. I kind of don't know. Gatsby continues to be a huge success, going from 98% to 98%, and 1,333,401 to 1,271,712. The Notebook went from 92% to 91%, and 760K to 726K. Again, it's very underwhelming box office. I think this will close at the end of the year. We're halfway through the summer. Well, not halfway, but it should have improved a lot in this past month. And just looking at how it's doing, I don't think this is going to make $1 million in the summer. So again, I predict this will close at the end of the year or possibly earlier, because I think this is going to fall hard in the fall. Again, this season has been very surprising. I could be wrong, but it seems like The Notebook has settled into a pace of 6s and 7s, and that simply just doesn't cut it. And again, for investors, it's very underwhelming and disappointing that a brand that is this well-known, beloved, and strong is not being able to get in the numbers that they want. And for any show, 7s and 6s isn't great, especially a new musical. Again, if a new musical had done $1 million for like a year and then it falls into 7s and 6s, there's a bit more leniency, a bit more of an okay, we're not going to close. But yeah, The Outsiders went from 102.26 to 102.47, and 1,307,257 to 1,338,556. The Who's Tommy definitely is good in closing. It's good that they announced that they were closing, because this was a terrible week, going from 78% to 70%, and 794K to 654K. The Wiz went from 1,481,208 and 97% to 92%, and 1,313,269. And Water for Elephants going from 86% to 76%, and 1,123,678 or 969,253. Again, I think Water for Elephants could close by Labor Day or by January. I think it will make $1 million just barely in the summer, and then I think it will falter enough that it will close in the end of the year, or by the end of the year. So anyways, those are my thoughts on the grosses. A lot of shows were down, and some interesting developments, but overall, we're pretty much at the same place we were at last week. So let me know what you think in the comments down below. Like, subscribe, comment, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.